The biggest key to Penn State beating Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl? It's none other than Drew Allar.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Penn State fans? That is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, bringing you all things Penn State Nittany Lions coverage, and it's finally here. The Peach Bowl is here, Saturday, December 30th. This show going up the day before to preview it. We're going to predict the game, give you my final score prediction, talk about how Penn State and Ole Miss are going to battle each other, how Penn State will try to stop, how they can stop the Ole Miss Rebels, and in the final segment, talk about some key players for Penn State that you need to watch out for in this game. And I like to start this episode off with the prediction, my final score for this one, and then I defend it. If you're not already an everydayer, become one. The everydayers are familiar with these prediction episodes. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, Penn State is a 4.5-point favorite in this game, courtesy of the official sportsbook of Locked On FanDuel, and the total is set for 48.5. Kickoff is set for noon Eastern Time, Saturday, December 30th on ESPN. It's at the Atlanta Falcons Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. And for those who didn't know already, the roof is going to be closed. So no weather implications here. My final score prediction. Penn State is going to beat Ole Miss 27-24 in this year's Peach Bowl. Was anybody really going to be surprised by my pick of Penn State? I will say this, though. I was a little torn early on when this game was announced because of the potential opt-outs by both sides, but particularly by Penn State's side, because I thought there would be some matchups that Ole Miss would have been able to expose them with, that Penn State would have been vulnerable, but everybody but Chop Robinson is set to be available, set to play in this game until, well, we won't exactly know how many snaps each and everyone's going to play until kickoff. That is my final score, 27-24. And the biggest key to all of this is quarterback Drew Allar. This is where these types of players really take, particularly quarterbacks, particularly young quarterbacks with a lot of potential. You can argue all you want about how good Drew Allar is right now and if he should be in the Heisman conversation for next season. That's fine, and we'll probably debate that a lot on this show. But this is where quarterbacks that take that next step, or at least supposed to, this is the setting to do it. This is where you do it. Brian Smith, he's a guest on the show, and he's made this point before. Quarterbacks who are newer to college football, to really get adjusted, to get situated, they need to throw the ball at least 400 times before they really get comfortable. And I think Drew Allar, for what it's worth, I know he's not perfect right now, and he's got to live up to the 5-star expectations, but a first-time starter with a 23 touchdown to 1 interception ratio is pretty damn good, if I'm being honest. So Drew had a good season from that regard, but did he light up the box score? Not exactly. And this is where quarterbacks and Drew Allar didn't take over any games, and I think that's what people are looking for. So this is the spot that you look for. If Penn State is going to win this one, do I think Drew Allar is going to have a Christian Hackenberg game circa the bowl game against Boston College, the Pinstripe Bowl up in Yankee Stadium? Not exactly here, because this is a Penn State team that's designed to protect the football and let the defense win the game, and then the offense just manages the clock. So that's where Drew Allar can take the next step. But I want to see more control from Drew Allar. I want to see the big play ability more so, not just against Michigan State, right? This is a formidable opponent in Ole Miss. And if Penn State's going to win, Drew Allar has to do just that. Show that he can take control of this game to either maintain its control or to get Penn State back from behind. I don't think it's going to get that. But the books are still disrespecting Drew Allar. In the state of Pennsylvania, you don't have access to college football player props. But I was interested in what it would be for other places. And it's 182 yards the last time I checked. Maybe that changes right before kickoff from whenever you check out this show. 182 yards. I'm a betting man. I am. And if I had access to this prop, it would be hard for me not to resist putting money on this prop, but 182 yards for Drew Allar. That has my signature of approval if you like to take that as well. But this is going to be within that 4.5 point spread. And I do think the total goes over one way or another. If you watch the preview episode between myself and Locked On Ole Miss's Stephen Willis, you knew that one way or another, there's going to be points in this one because of the type of opponent Ole Miss is. For Drew Allar, he gets help here. Tyler Warren returning for 2024. Theo Johnson set to play in this game. Trey Wallace is trending in the right direction. Trey Wallace was practicing, looked like there were no limitations, so he seems to be back. And I can't imagine that he's going to be on a pitch count because he's returning next season. You have Dante Cephas now more situated in the program. He's got to know the playbook by now, right? He has to. And everybody is just healthier and refreshed. So a receiving core that didn't exactly overwhelm defenses now can hit the reset button here and work with Drew Allar to have a good game. Again, I don't think he needs to throw for 300, 400 yards, but what I'm looking for is not turning the ball over. And when you need that big play, you take command. We didn't, other than the Indiana game where Drew Allar hit Keandre Lambert-Smith for that game-winning play, we did not see the passing game take command, and this is where they can do it, okay? This getting Trey Wallace back is a big deal. The offensive system adjustments that have been made. This is still the base offense that they've been working with, but now has had time to adjust and practice. And the play callers, Jalen Sider and Ty Howell together, have a little more comfortability here. You got to do it against Rutgers and Michigan State, and then you had a month to practice for an SEC opponent. This is where high potential quarterbacks really take off after that first full season. Brian Smith said it best. You need at least 400 passing attempts to really figure out who you are as a quarterback. Drew Allar's thrown 410 to be exact over his freshman and sophomore season. So this is where we're really going to find out, because I don't look at this as the end of the 2023 season. I look at this as a preseason game for 2024. And maybe this is a college football playoff game with the 12-team format. That's all I'm going to say. But it is up to Drew Allar, not only just protecting the football. He can't just protect the football anymore. It is about taking control and putting Ole Miss's defense back on its heels. Penn State has all of its players. That's one of the other biggest reasons here. And Ole Miss has a bulk of its roster too. Some role players in the transfer portal, but no impact players other than one, and that's Cedric Johnson. But Cedric Johnson, a defensive lineman for Ole Miss. Penn State will be without Chop Robinson, and that's the only player that's not available in this game. But now there isn't that matchup exploitation, because I was concerned that Penn State might be without its 3 starting cornerbacks against this trio of wide receivers that Ole Miss has. So Penn State having 99% of its roster intact is another reason why I think they win this game. Ole Miss's defense is good. It's not great. It's middle of the pack when you look at a lot of the statistical categories, except turnovers forced. They are one of the worst teams when it comes to forcing turnovers. So Penn State already protects the ball well enough as it is. One of the best teams in the country. Same with Ole Miss. Both these teams protect the football. But the big difference here, Ole Miss is one of the worst at forcing turnovers, and Penn State is one of the best, top 5 at forcing turnovers on defense. So those two things might meet together in the middle, and Penn State has that advantage. Remember, this still is a Penn State offense. That's why I'm not going full throttle and saying, oh, Penn State's going to air it out. They can get into a shootout. They can't. They can't get into a shootout because Penn State's offense was designed all season long to manage games and not make big mistakes. So you're going to see Penn State break out of its shell a little bit, but not this total 180 of, well, they're an air raid offense. Drew Allar is going to throw for 400 yards on 50 pass attempts. As fun and exciting as that would be, Penn State just needs to be able to carry over elements. You can do it against Michigan State. That's great. But can you do it against Ole Miss, which is a much better opponent in many regards, but also defensively, even though they're not elite, they can still pose some problems. But Penn State's offense has never been flashy. We didn't see any of the big runs from Nicholas Singleton. Sure, Katron Allen was able to get his, but whenever it came to third downs, Penn State could really be in an issue. They could have issues, could see big problems if they get into a lot of third and lengthy situations, because they have the talent on this offensive side of the football, but they've never been able to execute to its potential. And that's what has been so frustrating. If Ole Miss is really able to stop the run, they give up about 4 yards per carry, which again, middle of the pack. But they can flip the script if they can force Penn State into third and not so manageables. We've seen that. This game specifically, is won or lost on first and second down for Penn State when it's on offense. That is truly so. Drew Allar's the key, but when you look at it in this regard, Penn State has to win on first and second down. If you're going to get in third down, that's fine, but make it 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1, right? I do miss the tush push with Drew Allar. We see it a lot with Jalen Hurts in the NFL. We haven't seen it so much with Drew Allar because Penn State's not getting in those short yardage situations enough. They just aren't. They're not setting themselves up for success. But I've already mentioned the defensive backs, having all of them available. And plus, KJ Winston, Jalen Reed, Zach Wheatley, your 6 best cover guys are ready to go. I was concerned that this matchup was going to be Cam Miller, Elliott Washington, King Mack versus Trey Harris, Dayton Wade, and Jordan Watkins. Get to know those names for Ole Miss because each of them are all targeted pretty evenly. Ole Miss will get the Rebels will get theirs. They're an offensive team. They're one of the best offenses in the country. They went 10-2 as an SEC team. Penn State's also not great in the red zone. So that's why I think 27-24 is pretty understandable here. It's pretty realistic. The final thought about this: does not having Manny Diaz play a larger role than some people might anticipate? And I say no. I don't think it does because Penn State retained every other defensive staff member. Now you did lose Ola Adams, the analyst, but the coaches that are on the field, you retained everybody else. Anthony Poindexter, who's calling plays in this game, he was the co-defensive coordinator. So this, as much as Manny Diaz was the architect, Anthony Poindexter played a big role in this as well. So it's going to be the same style of defense, no serious changes. Players don't have to learn anything radical here. Offense and defense will be relatively the same with some adjustments and some tweaks to play to the matchup. Penn State wins 27-24. That is my final score prediction. Now, how do you contain Ole Miss? Because I don't know that you exactly stop them, but how do you limit them? How do you contain them? We're going to discuss how Penn State will execute its game plan and what they're looking for in order to try to limit Ole Miss in the next segment. And today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to its peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into that MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. The Locked On Podcast Network is making history. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering each and every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Here's what you need to know about Ole Miss and how to, well, you don't exactly stop them. You limit them. You try to contain them. It starts and ends with the offense. Lane Kiffin is an offensive mind. Whether he's been in the NFL, whether he's been at all these other destinations at Ole Miss, he's bringing this offense that is fast-paced and can give you headaches. And I like this matchup a lot. Penn State's top-rated defense versus Ole Miss's top-rated offense. And as we've seen throughout the history of football, defense typically prevails. And I think it will in this case. But they play fast. They're well coached. Lane Kiffin, one of the smartest minds in college football. I'm not afraid to admit that. Quarterbacks Jaxson Dart, veteran, has been around for a little bit at this time. Remember, he started at USC and then he transferred over to Ole Miss. takes care of the football like Drew Allar. Now, he does have 5 interceptions, but 20 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, nearly 3,000 yards, just under that mark. But solid season for him, especially against SEC competition. As I mentioned, former USC quarterback, former top prospect when he was coming out of high school, and he can move. He can move. He's got a little mobility to him, 311 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. So Jaxson Dart, your starter. Spencer Saunders, who transferred in from Oklahoma State, is ineligible for this game. So if there's any changes to the quarterback, Walker Howard, another top prospect coming out of high school, would be the backup in this case. But expect Jaxson Dart to play all the way through. Again, barring, I want to see a good, fair competition. So barring anything crazy, I want Jaxson Dart to play in this game to see how, the right Penn State needs this opponent to see how good they truly were. Whether they win or lose this game, we finally have an accurate impression of where Penn State should be rated. Because I've said this a long time, they're in college football purgatory with the competition that they played. Not playing up to Michigan and Ohio State, but they beat up on everybody else, including Utah in a Rose Bowl game. So where are they truly in terms of the best programs of the entire country? Running back Quinshon Judkins. Most people might recognize this name. He was a 2023 preseason Heisman contender. I actually mentioned him on this show alongside Singleton and Allen as some of the best backs in the country. Over 1,000 rushing yards, 1,052 to be exact, and 15 rushing touchdowns. So they like him in the red zone quite a bit. And they used him effectively in the passing game, but he's not overwhelming as far as a receiver, but they do utilize him. And since Penn State likes to blitz, I imagine that Ole Miss is probably going to drop a few screens here and there to keep that defense honest. Even though Manny Diaz isn't calling plays, it will still look very similar to how Manny Diaz would, since Anthony Poindexter was the co-DC. I just want to remind everyone of that. This was the matchup that I was most intrigued about because Ole Miss's offense likes to fly up and down the field. And how do you do that? You have to have a good aerial attack. And when you have not one, not two, but 3 wide receivers that were all over 700 yards receiving this season, all around, some of them had over 50. One of them had just under 50. It's a pretty even distribution. So on any given day, any given Saturday, and the Peach Bowl is being played on Saturday. So here for college football, Trey Harris or Wade or Watkins, any of them can act as that number 1 receiver. Now, I feel like Trey Harris is the best of them. We got that confirmation from Locked On Ole Miss's Stephen Willis, but the stats say that as well. Even though he doesn't have as many receptions, he's slightly behind in that category. He's got 8 touchdowns. He's got 8 touchdowns compared to everybody else. Just to put it in perspective, Dayton Wade has half. He has 4, and Jordan Watkins has 3. So Trey Harris is the favorite target when it comes to scoring inside the red zone. But Wade and Watkins respectively have 52 and 53 receptions compared to Trey Harris's 47. But Harris led the team in receiving yards with 851, but all of them over that 700-yard mark. It's just a very even distribution. You can't get locked in on just one wide receiver. You have to be able to focus on all 3. And Cam Miller, I think, would be able to have a good matchup against maybe the 2 or the 3rd. Trey Harris, I think, would be a tough challenge. But it's nice that you have Taquan Hardy and Johnny Dixon and Kalen King all available to play in this game. We'll see how much they do play, but you need them in this game for this kind of matchup. And those guys won't have any restrictions. They're going to be playing, I think, to their fullest abilities in this case. And don't sleep on the tight end here, Caden Prieskorn. He is important in terms of not necessarily a safety blanket for Jaxson Dart, but I see him as another player that's just for security. He does have 313 yards on the season and 20 receptions. Not that go-to check down, but in an emergency case, just don't forget about him. But it's nice because Penn State has Curtis Jacobs back. Curtis Jacobs didn't opt out of this game, so that matchup it might be able to offset itself with the way that Jacobs is able to cover. The only significant opt-out for Ole Miss, and I mentioned him earlier, Cedric Johnson, veteran, 5.5 sacks. So you essentially trade Chop Robinson for Cedric Johnson in this case. Now, how do you stop Ole Miss? How do you limit the offense? Anyway, what is the blueprint in this case? You get pressure. So this is why this is an ideal scenario for Penn State, even with Chop Robinson out, because a blitz-happy, aggressive defense that Manny Diaz, Anthony Poindexter, and the rest of the staff have built together get pressure, and Jaxson Dart, under like any other quarterback, does not do well typically under pressure. But their stud right tackle, Micah Pettis, has been out for the season, and he's been gone since about week 10. If you're able to get pressure from that front side, and I anticipate rolling Jaxson Dart out to his non-throwing side, his left side, he might throw one or two bad passes that Penn State can, flip the game script, because I do anticipate this one to be close. And no lead is going to be safe in this case. Now, I know Penn State will do, it's done one of the better jobs of protecting leads in all of college football, but Ole Miss doesn't go away. It's not like, well, they're up, Penn State's up by 2 touchdowns. That's safe. That's comfortable. No, because Ole Miss can score just like that. But you got to get pressure. You got to make Jaxson Dart uncomfortable very early in this game. Avoid getting into a shootout. Keep the offense off the field. Those two things go hand in hand. If you can keep Ole Miss's offense cold, you don't want them to get hot. You want them to stay on the sideline. Jaxson Dart not be able to get into a rhythm. Quinshon Judkins actually struggled a little bit this year. The Ole Miss running game, I don't want to say was bailed out by the passing game, but the other had to set up the running game. So normally it's you use the run to set up the pass. In this case, Ole Miss used the pass to set up the run. And with Penn State's number one rushing defense in terms of yards per carry, something that Quinshon Judkins wasn't able to duplicate from his freshman season. The sophomore slump is real. Nicholas Singleton had to deal with it. I think Quinshon Judkins, aside from him scoring 15 touchdowns on the ground, really did take a step. The sophomore slump is real. I fully believe in it now. I said, well, that's just the myth. No, it is. The sophomore slump is real. But avoid getting into the shootout. You want to Penn State. That's why I don't think the scoreboard's going to light up in this case, because Penn State knows if you can keep Ole Miss's defense or offense on the sideline and keep that defense out on the field and sustain those drives that are 10, 11, a dozen plays, that is the effective way to beating this Rebels team. So keep the offense off the field for Ole Miss. And if you can force a turnover or two, because Penn State, I don't think they're going to force any, especially since that's not the Rebels' forte. Since they don't get many takeaways, if really any, they just don't. They just don't force takeaways. Protect the football. I think the difference, if Penn State's even able to get one, that can flip the script into Penn State's favor. 2 is obviously very nice, but forcing a turnover in this case when Ole Miss typically doesn't do it, and then they don't force any of their own, that's going to bode well for a Penn State victory in this case. So that is the blueprint. It's really about putting pressure on the offense, because the defense isn't going to be able to do anything to bail it out. And at Penn State, the way that they play, grind down the opponent, use not your 2 stud running backs to do just that, and Drew Allar doesn't turn the football over. It's the appropriate formula to get this win, and an impressive win against an SEC opponent. Now, players to watch for Penn State, even though they only had one opt-out, there's going to be guys that are on a pitch count. Johnny Dixon, Caitlin King aren't going to play full games. I don't anticipate Curtis Jacobs, Theo Johnson, Olu Fashanu. So who are the players that are going to need to step up in this case for the Nittany Lions? We'll discuss on the other side of this break. And today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including the pros and the sharks, you pick more than or less than on a 2 to 6 player stat projection and watch those winnings roll in. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Prize Picks is really simple to play. You make your picks and you can submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, as I've mentioned, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. And with the Prize Picks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For NFL games, college football top 25 matchups like Penn State versus Ole Miss, if your player exits in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is then rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use promo code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code lockedoncollege for that first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. I appreciate each and every one of you checking out this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. If you're not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Let me know in the comments who you think will win and who's going to cover the spread. Give me your final score prediction. Penn State players to watch out for. With even though there haven't been a lot of opt-outs, there's certainly going to be a game plan to protect the draft stock. Olu Fashanu, Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, all those guys that are giving Penn State one final game, even though they're going to move on to the NFL draft. So there are plenty of players. Drew Allar's the obvious one, and I think the wide receivers are as well, because this is the chance to essentially re-audition. Penn State has not been quiet, has not been shy about saying, yeah, we need a wide receiver. And they've been looking at offensive linemen, defensive linemen, a little bit of the secondary, going to the transfer portal to get a kicker as well. But it's been wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. And they have not been shy about that. So I think as important as this game is for Drew Allar to take that next step, the wide receivers essentially have to re-audition to save their spots. DeAndre Lambert-Smith, Dante Cephas, Trey Wallace, any of the guys behind them, Caden Saunders, Liam Clifford, all those guys, this is an opportunity to show that they still belong. Their jobs are safe. And part of the reason that Penn State isn't getting this overwhelming amount, and I've said this on previous episodes, that they're not getting all these other wide receiver transfer portal targets in at the moment, is because this is still a crowded room. Aside from Christian Driver entering the portal, everybody else is still there. Everybody else, and Driver technically still doesn't have to transfer. He doesn't have a destination yet. So I think it's important for Dante Cephas, who we saw did not exactly have the playbook down pat throughout the season. Keandre Lambert-Smith never became that number one wide receiver truly. Never did. I likened him more to a 2 or a 3, and I think he would just benefit from that schematically. He's just not a number one. But prove me wrong. Prove me wrong, KLS. Trey Wallace, I hope he's healthy and that he's ready to go for this game. And maybe he takes that next step, because I feel like he still has some untapped potential. But James Franklin said all off season and throughout the season that it's Trey Wallace and Keandre Lambert-Smith. Well, they lost Wallace for a period of time. Keandre Lambert-Smith never really became that true bona fide target for Drew Allar. Wide receivers, this one's important too. And do Caden Saunders and Liam Clifford show that they still have it? Malik McLean, Malik Mega, can any of them? Or does Penn State still have to? Because remember, there's that second transfer portal window. So even if they don't get anybody now, this is the preseason this is a preseason game for 2024. That's just the honest nature of it. There's that second transfer portal window after spring ball in April where they can still go get wide receivers. So that's why this game is important, because it counts, it matters. It's not a glorified scrimmage, even though it is a look at 2024. And I say preseason, but I don't mean that truly, but I mean that as the first game. Even though it doesn't count towards your record, it counts towards a lot of other things that aren't going to show up on a stat sheet or a schedule result, right? Drew Shelton and Javen Williams, Olu Fashanu. I can't imagine that Olu Fashanu is going to play a lot of snaps. He might not even play at all, but he's practicing and he's going to be dressed for this game. It's just a matter of how much he plays. Maybe they only put him in the red zone, or they have him alternate on drives. So who is next up? Well, Drew Shelton has the starting experience. He came in as a true freshman when Fashanu was banged up. But Javen Williams is the one, top player in Pennsylvania. Just last year, class of 2023, right? And a player that has a lot of potential as a 5-star. So who's going to win that battle to take over the left tackle spot? I'm not so certain that it's just Drew Shelton's job. Maybe Javen Williams pushes him. That's why I have both of them going in for Olu Fashanu, because I think Penn State wants to see how far along Javen Williams is, or is Drew Shelton that much better? And the gap never really closed because he is the veteran compared to Williams. Deni Dennis Sutton is a name that needs to be brought up because it's his defensive line. Adisa Isaac officially declared for the 2024 NFL draft. It was just assumed at that point that he was going to. It made a lot of sense, but now it's official. This is Deni Dennis Sutton's defensive line room. He might even be a captain next year. High energy, high motor. I think he deserves to be a captain, but those performances are going to be an indicator in games like this of if he can be a captain for the 2024 season. Because Curtis Jacobs is going into the NFL draft. This one makes sense as well. Tony Rojas probably is going to start next year at that spot. Maybe, but Dom DeLuca, you right? Dom DeLuca, Tony Rojas, who is going to be that next guy? You have Abdul Carter, of course, you have Kobe King, but who's going to be that on-ball linebacker for Penn State next season? And Tony Rojas, if he sees an increased snap count, has a chance to make an impression. Showed out against Maryland, but that game obviously got a little out of hand. Let's see when the competition and the score are close. Can Tony Rojas perform, and is he going to take that next step? Any of the cornerbacks, I think particularly Cam Miller is the most important. Elliott Washington, King Mack, maybe a Lamont Payne in this case, Zion Tracy, any of those names, but all of those guys are going to see increased snap counts going into 2024. Penn State has to replace all three starting cornerbacks. You lose so much veteran experience. Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, Daquan Hardy. Cam Miller is now the veteran of the cornerbacks. I think Penn State will have a plan in place because you have Jalen Reed coming back, Zachy Wheatley, KJ Winston, and all those guys are talented and can cover, but you still need a boundary corner, not a safety that comes down in passing situations. You need to be able to rely on your cornerbacks, and Cam Miller, James Franklin's offered a lot of praise and some of it unprovoked as well. So Penn State is excited to see what Cam Miller can do. And this is the test to do it. All three wide receivers are very capable. Whether Miller's guarding Harris, whether he's guarding Wade, I don't think it matters. Or Watkins in this case, Miller will have the chance, the opportunity to show that he can be a number one cornerback in Penn State's defense next season. But it will be a tough challenge. Ole Miss can sling the football. That will do it for this preview episode. This is the last one for the Penn State football season in 2023. It's a little bittersweet. We're going to have a live recap after the Peach Bowl. It's been a great season. I have nothing but just gratitude and appreciation for all of you joining me in these conversations, showing up for each and every episode, subscribing to follow along, turning on notifications. And I thank you, each and every one of you, so much. Let's continue to grow this community, make this show as best as it can be in the new year. So here's to 2024. Here's to a Penn State win. And we'll have more football coverage, men's basketball coverage, hockey, wrestling. It'll all be right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.